yet again taking another Saturday morning to listen to me talk. I'm really thankful and really grateful that I'm able to have this opportunity to share all of this knowledge with you.
Dr. Yi, the pandemic has been going on for over a year now. What new updates are there?
So we've been stuck in this pandemic for a while now, but soon we should be heading into a different phase, more like the endemic phase of the pandemic. So before we get there, I want to give everyone an update on what's happening so far and what has been discovered. We have more data now from the pandemic, and from this we have new findings. But with any data, you'll always find that some research will say one thing, others will find conflicting results. One research will show one percentage, another one might show a different number, so just keep that in mind. Hopefully by next year, we'll have even more data, and then we'll be able to pull out better and better information. So the first one is that now that COVID has been for a while, the next hurdle we'll be facing isn't really more the initial infection of COVID, but more of long COVID. Now, what is long COVID? Most people who catch COVID-19 won't become severely ill and they will recover. However, a significant number will continue to have long-term problems after the initial infection. It doesn't really seem to matter if they weren't very ill in the first place. And this long COVID can last for weeks or even months. Another name that people call it is post-COVID-19 syndrome. To gain more insight, the U.S. National Institutes of Health has launched an ambitious study to investigate long COVID. Previous studies have shown that about 27.5% of patients who do not require hospitalization and 50% of patients who do require hospitalization are affected by long COVID. Now, about 50% of COVID-19 survivors will have symptoms a year later. 52.7% still show lung abnormalities at 6 months. 1/3 will report shortness of breath 1 year after they've been released from hospital. But these are just a small fraction of the symptoms that someone with long COVID might suffer from. These other symptoms might include things like extreme tiredness, heart palpitations or chest pain, brain fog, changes to taste and smell, joint pain, difficulty sleeping, tinnitus, diarrhea, nausea, loss of appetite, cough, headache, sore throat, rashes, etc., etc. It can affect organs throughout your body as well. Now, COVID-19 survivors may experience heart damage. Even patients who don't require hospitalization are experiencing cardiac injury, such as myocarditis. That means inflammation of the heart muscle, and that can actually lead to heart failure later on in life. It can also occur in people without pre-existing heart conditions. 78% of recovered patients had heart abnormalities, and 60% had ongoing myocardial inflammation. Now, there's some evidence showing that the COVID-19 virus can impair your pancreatic cell function. Infected beta cells in the pancreas produce less insulin than usual. Now, this is a problem here because if you have a problem with beta cells in your body, then you're putting yourself at greater risk of diabetes. Now, these damaged cells can start to produce glucose and digestive enzymes, which isn't their job. So some COVID-19 survivors have developed diabetes shortly after the infection. Now, long COVID can kill months after the initial infection. There's a 59% increased risk of dying within 6 months after getting COVID-19. Excess mortality translates to about 8 extra deaths per 1,000 survivors. But there is some good news out there. People who are vaccinated and get COVID-19 are less likely to develop long COVID. A new study has found that breakthrough cases, which means people who get infected despite having been vaccinated, have a 49% lower risk of developing long COVID. This means that the vaccine could protect against someone not only getting COVID-19, but also against getting long COVID. Now, children and young adults are also getting long COVID. It doesn't mean that they're immune to it. So it's not just something that happens to older people or people of poor health. 1 in 7 children develop symptoms of long COVID. A study published in Nature Medicine found that 52% of people aged 16 to 30 years experience symptoms 6 months after getting COVID-19. So even after 6 months, they were still suffering from symptoms. The UK Office for National Statistics shows that 13% of children aged 2 to 11 years and 14.5% of children aged 12 to 16 years still experience symptoms after 5 weeks. So 1 in 5 asymptomatic COVID-19 patients will develop long COVID symptoms. So about 20% develop long COVID. So it's not something that only happens to people who get hospitalized or people who have symptoms of COVID-19. Even if you don't have any symptoms, the virus can still be causing damage to your body. So even asymptomatic infections can damage the lungs. About 50% of asymptomatic cases have ground glass opacities on lung CT scans. Now it's called a ground glass because it looks like ground glass on the CT scans. We're very literal with our naming sometimes. It indicates areas of increased density, which is not good. Your lungs shouldn't have very much density because it should be mostly air. So if you find increased density, that means that there's something other than air filling that space, which is a problem. Now, this could be anything from fluids, cells, pus, or even, the walls of the tiny air sacs have gotten thicker, and none of that is good news. So other studies report that 3 out of 4 had lung damage. Many of the asymptomatic cases also had heart damage. So far, we don't know much about the long-term effects because there hasn't been enough time to study the long-term effects yet. But over time, we'll get more and more data and we'll have a clearer insight about what's going on. Currently, the COVID-19 pandemic surpasses the 1918 flu pandemic as the deadliest pandemic in the United States. More than 4.7 million people globally have died from COVID-19. So far, there are about 231, almost 232 million confirmed cases. But over time, more deaths are to be expected, and not from the initial infection, but likely from the complications of long COVID. Now, children account for more than a quarter of the new weekly US COVID-19 cases. So children are vulnerable to infection as well. And knowing this, although some children are getting vaccinated as an off-label use of the vaccine, FDA authorization isn't there yet. But Pfizer is seeking FDA authorization to give the vaccine to kids ages 5 to 11. The US CDC really emphasizes the importance of vaccination. If you're unvaccinated, you're 10 times more likely to be hospitalized and 11 times more likely to die of COVID-19 compared to those who are fully vaccinated. Now, research shows that the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine is more effective at preventing hospitalization than the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine or the Johnson & Johnson's Janssen vaccine. Moderna is so far showing to be about 95% effective. Pfizer-BioNTech is about 80% effective, and the Janssen vaccine is about 60% effective. Now, so far, there are 7 vaccines approved for use by the WHO, and let's just go through them. The first one is Moderna. It's an mRNA vaccine, and it's approved in 72 countries and has had 28 trials done in 2 countries. Next one is Pfizer-BioNTech, which is also an mRNA vaccine. It's approved in 100 countries and has done 33 trials in 16 countries. The Janssen, also known as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, is a non-replicating viral vector vaccine. It's approved in 66 countries with 10 trials done in 16 countries. AstraZeneca is also a non-replicating viral vector vaccine. It's approved in 122 countries with 40 trials done in 2 countries. Now, the Serum Institute of India also has a non-replicating viral vector vaccine. It's approved in 45 countries and has done 2 trials in 1 country. Now, from China, we have the Sinopharm vaccine, which is an inactivated vaccine. It's approved in 64 countries with 11 trials done in 4 countries. And we also have the Sinovac vaccine, which is also an inactivated vaccine. It's approved in 40 countries with 19 trials in 2 countries. So we have a lot of vaccine options out there. So it doesn't really matter which vaccine you get. The most important one is to just have a look at where you live, which vaccines are available to you, and just take a vaccine. All right, any vaccine is better than not being vaccinated at all.
Dr. Yi, a lot of people have been feeling more stress during the pandemic. What effect does stress have on our health?
So with this pandemic into its 2nd year, with all of these months of social distancing, and not only has our daily routines been rocked, but we also have it's like our work-life balance is gone. You know, work has invaded our life. Our life has invaded everything. Is just intertwined now, and it's brought all sorts of ongoing uncertainty into our lives. So it's not surprising that stress has increased during the pandemic. Now, huge data sets have shown changes in mental health during the pandemic. The devastation of the pandemic, the millions of deaths, the economic strife, the unprecedented curbs on social interaction, all of this has had an effect on people's mental health. The average share of adults reporting symptoms of anxiety disorder and or depressive disorder has increased from 11% in January to June of 2019 to 41% in January 2021. And honestly, you know, when you look at this data, a part of you is just like, I'm not really surprised. You know, it's been tough on all of us. So the COVID stress disorder, now, it's a lot of things all feeding into each other. Now, young adults have experienced a number of pandemic-related consequences, like university closures, loss of income that has impacted mental health, as well as curbs on social interaction. During the pandemic, now I'm talking about young adults here because even prior to the pandemic, young adults were already at a higher risk of poor mental health, although many unfortunately didn't receive adequate treatment for it. But during the pandemic, a larger than average share of young adults report symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder, about 56%. So if you look at us all, you know, the economy and the job market has also not been kind. Research from prior economic downturns shows that job loss is associated with increased depression, anxiety, distress, and low self-esteem. Even prior to the pandemic, adults in households with job loss or lower incomes report higher rates of, symptoms of mental illness or just stress. So it's no surprising that those who are employed want to work really, really hard to keep their jobs. But then when you do this, and then plus that we're also working from home, this can blur lines that used to be pretty fixed. So there's more and more people as well reporting working longer hours or irregular hours because there's no longer that clear cut line between this is when I start work, this is when I'm done with work, and this is when I'm at home and no longer at work. So research during the pandemic also points to concerns around poor mental health and well-being for children and their parents, particularly mothers, because many are experiencing challenges with school closures and lack of childcare. women with children are more likely to report symptoms of anxiety or depression than men with children, about 49% compared to 40%. Plus, for a lot of people, they get cabin fever, being trapped at home all the time. Now, whether this is people living at home, if they're stuck with roommates, families, partners, everyone is always around, just stuck in a confined space, it can create more stress. Or if someone is already stressed, then any additional annoyances, even if they're really small, in the past you might have been able to just brush it off, but because you're already so stressed, it seems like a much bigger problem than it was before. Another thing that's happening for all of us is something called COVID-somnia. Now, this is the phenomenon that's hit people all over the world as they experience insomnia linked to the stress of life during COVID-19. In the UK, studies have shown that the number of people experiencing insomnia rose from 1 in 6 to 1 in 4. In China, insomnia rates have risen from 14.6% to 20% during their peak lockdown. Even in Italy or in Greece, nearly 40% of respondents in a May study were shown to have insomnia. All right, but that's just research. If you just look at Google results, the word insomnia was Googled more in 2020 than it has ever had before. So simply put, a lot of us are now insomniacs. Insomnia, whether in a pandemic or not, is difficult to live with. Having trouble falling asleep or experiencing poor quality of sleep can lead to long-term health impacts, including obesity, anxiety, depression, heart disease, diabetes, etc. Plus, it just wreaks absolute havoc on our mental health and our moods. But what can help us manage anxiety and help us manage all of these feelings of, stress is understanding better why our body reacts to stress in this way. So it's called the fight or flight response, and it's an automatic physiological reaction to an event that is perceived to be stressful or frightening. This perception of a threat activates a portion of your nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system, and it triggers this acute stress response that in ancient times would prepare your body to fight or to flight or to run away. So these responses were evolutionary adaptations, and it was meant to increase your survival in threatening situations. It was meant to save your life, and it's not something that you can trigger consciously. It's an automatic reaction. But overly frequent, intense, or inappropriate activation of this response is implicated in a range of conditions, including most anxiety disorders. But a helpful part for the treatment or just helping people manage anxiety is an improved understanding of the purpose and the function of this fight or flight response. So let's go over it. Now, if you look at all of these responses, right, these are all emergency functions. So this fight or flight response, it plays a critical role in truly threatening situations. But people who suffer from anxiety disorders or stress or poor mental health, other conditions might actually trigger this. And all of these, these threat systems, they become overactive. So how does it start? Now, firstly, the hypothalamus is a bit like the command center of your brain. This area of the brain communicates with the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system, which controls involuntary body functions like breathing, blood pressure, heartbeats, all of these things. So it's all very involuntary. All right, now the autonomic nervous system has two components, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system functions like the gas pedal in the car. All right, so if you are facing down a lion, what happens then is the sympathetic nervous system presses the gas pedal to the floor. It triggers the fight or flight response, providing the body with all of these things that will help you, survive. It will help you survive. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is a bit like the brake. It is responsible for the opposite of the fight or flight response, the rest and digest response. And this is what helps calm the body down after the danger has passed. So what happens is the amygdala sends a distress signal. The hypothalamus then activates the sympathetic nervous system by sending signals through your nervous system. And then your body will respond by pumping out hormones like epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline, into the bloodstream, and other hormones like cortisol. As these hormones circulate throughout the body, it brings about a number of physiological changes. Your heart beats faster. You start pushing blood to the muscles, your heart and other vital organs. Your pulse rate, your blood pressure go up. You breathe faster. The small airways in your lungs open wide, so you get more oxygen. Extra oxygen is sent to your brain, so you feel more alert. Sight, hearing, other senses become sharper. Meanwhile, epinephrine also releases blood sugar, and fats from temporary storage sites in your body, which will just flood your body and supply energy to your body. Now, all of these changes, they're automatic. They happen so quickly that people are not even aware of them. In fact, the wiring is so efficient that your amygdala and hypothalamus can start this cascade before your brain's visual centers have had a chance to fully process what is happening. This is why you hear stories of people who say like, oh, my body just launched itself out of the way of a car before they even knew what they were thinking or even knew what they were doing. They only knew after the fact. Now, all of these changes in ancient times, it was designed to help you live and survive. So for example, in ancient times, maybe you were facing down a tiger. You have a reduced pain response because it helps you survive. If you're paralyzed by pain from injuries, you're not going to be able to fight a tiger. You're not going to be able to run away from a tiger either. Digestion will slow or stop because your body is focused on more pressing issues. And digestion isn't going to matter if you're not alive. Your eyes will dilate to take in more light so that you can scan all of your surroundings better. Now, all of these things, it did have a very important role. But unfortunately, now in modern life, this sort of response can be triggered inappropriately and lead to problems. Now, remember when I said that this response is triggered by a perceived threat? This means that the threat doesn't have to be real. It can be something intangible. For example, even though none of us are facing down tigers on a daily basis, the fight or flight response can still help us out. It can help us perform better in situations when we're under pressure to do well, like at work or in school, or even in situations where it doesn't really help us out, like a traffic jam or you got stage fright or something like that. It's usually still okay because our body can weather it. Our body has been designed to tolerate it. But this stress response is supposed to be self-limiting. Once the perceived threat has passed, hormone levels should return to normal. And as these hormone levels return to normal, your heart rate decreases, everything goes back to normal. But when you're always feeling stressed, when you're always feeling under attack, then that fight or flight response is always turned on. And the problem comes when we don't put the brakes on the stress and our body is perpetually in a state of high alert. So this chronic low-level stress, it keeps this entire chain of responses activated, much like a motor that has been idling for too long. So after a while, this has an effect on the body that contributes to health problems associated with chronic stress. So these persistent epinephrine or hormone surges can damage blood vessels and arteries, increase blood pressure, and increase the risk of heart attacks or even strokes. The elevated cortisol levels can create physiological changes that help replenish your body's energy stores that are depleted during the stress response. But then they also inadvertently contribute to the buildup of fat tissue and contribute to weight gain. That's why people who are always stressed all the time, they find that the number on the scale tends to go up. All of the comfort eating doesn't really help either. So for example, cortisol will also increase appetite. So people will also want to eat more. It really doesn't help. It also increases the storage of unused nutrients as fat. So this persistent stress response can increase levels of inflammation in our body and as a whole contributes to a whole host of conditions such as autoimmune diseases, cancer, or anxiety, depression, digestive problems, headache, muscle tension and pain, sleep problems, memory and concentration impairment, etc., etc. That's why it's so important for us to learn the healthy ways to cope with the stress that lives give us. So chronic stress can weaken our immune system. It can lower the number of lymphocytes that help fight off infections. Too much cortisol can also mean that our body gets used to it, which means more inflammation within our bodies. Now, when we're stressed, the immune system's ability to fight off antigens is reduced. Now, this is why we are more susceptible to infections. The stress hormone cortisol can suppress the effectiveness of the immune system. Now, researchers have actually looked into this. For nearly a decade, researchers studied medical students. We're always getting used as guinea pigs for things. But among other things, they found that the students' immunity went down every year in a very predictable time, and that was around their 3-day exam period. Test takers had fewer natural killer cells, which fight tumors and viral infections. They also stopped producing immunity-boosting gamma interferons, and infection-fighting T cells responded only weakly to test tube stimulation. Now, other researchers intrigued by these findings did their own studies, and they found very much the same results. Now, other researchers, they looked at breast cancer survivors and they reviewed nearly 300 studies on stress and health. They found that, stress for any significant duration from a few days to a few months or even, just a short period amount of time can have an effect on cancer and how well cancer survivors will deal with the cancer or will have a harder time with treatment or even recovery. So there is a link between stress and cancer. All right, now stress is a part of life. There's no escaping it. You feel it even when you're preparing for the holidays or even if you're just stuck in traffic. So a little bit of stress is nothing to fret about, because if you fret about that, you're just giving yourself more stress if you're stressing about stress. It's more the type of chronic stress over a long period of time that makes it hard for us to stay healthy. Now, there's been research suggesting that stress hormones can inhibit a process which kills disease cells and prevents them from spreading. Chronic stress can also speed the development of cancerous tumors by increasing their blood supply. Now, studies suggest that stress hormones can actually wake up dormant cancer cells that remain in the body after treatment. So a misconception people have with cancer treatments is that a lot of the time cancer treatments, they might kill the majority of cancer cells, but they might not kill every cancer cell. They might push the surviving cancer cells into a sort of hibernation. Now, these dormant cells either stop growing or they grow very, very slowly, but because there are so few of them, it's impossible to find them with standard tests. That's why doctors never say, oh, you're cured of cancer. It's more, you're in remission. Which means that so far with our modern tests and technology, we can't find an evidence of cancer in you, but that doesn't mean that you don't have cancer cells. All right, so usually these surviving cancer cells, they don't cause any issues unless they start growing again. So researchers have suspected that there might be a link between stress and cancer for a pretty long time, but the mechanism behind that link was somewhat elusive. But now we have more and more studies looking into this and shedding more light on exactly why there is this sort of connection between stress and cancer. Now, in experiments done in mice, stress hormones triggered a chain reaction in immune cells that sort of prompted these dormant cancer cells to wake up and form tumors again. Researchers found that these dormant lung cancer cells form tumors in stressed mice, but not in unstressed mice. Other studies have looked at humans, and they linked chronic stress to cancer progression in humans. An analysis of multiple different studies with a total number of about 700,000 women found that there may be a link between stressful events and breast cancer. What's more, this same mechanism could be contributing to cancer growth and treatment resistance in other ways. So this stress response can be impacting cancer from multiple different angles. So studies have shown that stress hormones can increase the number of pro-tumor cells in tumors. This means that stress can not only wake up dormant cancer cells, but it could also provide the right environment for them to grow. So we know that stress has a profound impact on how our body systems function. But now that we know this, this type of no end in sight sort of stress can leave us prone to diseases like cancer. So to put it really simply, like everything I said before, to put it really simply, stress makes your body more hospitable to cancer. The medical director of Cancer Treatment Centers of America has stated that chronic stress creates something of a perfect storm, where precancerous cells can grow and flourish. We know that high-stress cancer patients tend to have a harder time in treatment and recovery. All right, but there's more to life than this. So let's move on to something a little more lighthearted. The course of true love is never completely smooth. With the pandemic and increased stress, not only has it had an impact on our physical health, it's got an impact on other aspects of our life that we think are really important. So with the increased stress, molehills become mountains. Stress increases irritability, anger, irrationality. It can trigger anxieties. It can raise insecurities. Couples have found it hard to meet up during the pandemic, which causes difficulties. Contrary to what people say, prolonged distance does not make the heart fonder. On the other hand, couples forced to spend all of their time together might find out that they had, that the reality was different from what they were imagining. They might have some pent-up unhappiness, or, it's harder to meet emotional needs as well if everyone is just really stressed. Breakups skyrocketed around the world in 2020. A leading British law firm logged a 122% increase in divorce inquiries, with about 76% initiated by female clients. The USA showed a 34% increase in divorce agreements. In China, there were about 4.7 million divorces in 2019, but that nearly doubled in 2020 with 8.6 million divorces. Because of this, China introduced a cooling off period in the January of this year in hopes that it might curb the divorce rate. So not only did divorces increase, marriage rates also tumbled, but that's not entirely surprising. It's hard for people to meet. Plus, with all of the other restrictions going on, it's hard to tie the knot and throw that ceremony, that celebration that people deserve. In Japan, marriage rates decreased by nearly 137%. In Italy, the marriage rates decreased by 80% in the second quarter of 2020. In South Korea, the marriage rates decreased by 10.7%. So love, it isn't all rainbows and butterflies. It actually causes a lot of stress. For the first 6 months of falling in love, you have a much higher level of cortisol in your body. But after about 12 to 24 months, the cortisol levels tend to go back to normal. High cortisol levels can impair the immune system, increase the risk of infections, and increase the risk of having high blood pressure. So if you described all of these symptoms of love to someone, it does sound like they're unwell, right? We call it lovesick. They've got sweaty palms, they stammer, their heart is thumping, they have a flushed face, weak legs, brain fog, etc., etc. So love is a chemical reaction. It's all in the brain and not the heart. There's about 3 general stages of love. The first is attraction, which dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin are responsible for. The second is sexual desire, which is testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. Attachment, the third stage, happens with the oxytocin and vasopressin. It's these chemicals reacting in the brain that will give you these feelings of love. So let's look into the chemistry of love. Dopamine is also known as the feel-good hormone. It's the same chemical that will give people a high or get them addicted to things. Norepinephrine, also known as noradrenaline, is one of the hormones released in times of stress. Now, these two together make you feel alive. You feel alert, you feel happy, giddy, energetic, euphoric. But it can also lead to increased appetite and insomnia, especially in high levels. So we call it in love. You can't eat, can't sleep. Love is blind. Love lowers serotonin levels, which also happens to people with obsessive compulsive disorders. It can lead to these rose-colored glasses, where people in love only see the things that they want to see. You know that saying, when you have rose-colored glasses on, all of the red flags just look like flags. The essence of love, at least passionately romantic love, is revealed in its very grammar. We fall in love, we don't wander into it. We fall head over heels, not dragging our feet. We fall in love at first sight, not after careful introspection. We fall in love madly, blindly, to each other's vices, and not with a rational appraisal of the pros and cons. Falling in love increases cortisol in the first 6 to 12 months, and too much cortisol can impair your brain function, memory, and even reduce brain volume. That's why people falling in love seem a little bit silly to the rest of us on the outside looking in. But after the hormones wear off, then the honeymoon period is over. When your brain starts to function properly, the rose-colored glasses come off. You don't like, what about me? It's not me, it's you. You're the one that has to change. And then all of the bad feelings start coming out. But what gives you the good feelings? The cuddle hormone is also known as oxytocin. Now, this is the transition from infatuation to soulmate, friend, and family. Oxytocin is released during sex, breastfeeding, and childbirth. It helps form attachment and bonding. Vasopressin is involved in behaviors needed to guard a partner or territory. Now, love has an expiration date. Even though movies try to convince us that love lasts for a lifetime, the truth is the honeymoon period only lasts about 2 to 3 years at most. For that lasting love, the balance of hormones is key. Now, love is also chemically addictive. It activates the same brain circuitry and reward mechanism as a cocaine addiction, or really any addiction out there. You light up that dopamine reward pathway, the same one that lights up for other things that you like doing, like sweets, listening to music, attraction, or any sort of addiction, which means that you can also go into withdrawal after a breakup. That's part of the reason why breakups feel so terrible. Dopamine in moderate amounts is healthy. It helps us enjoy life. But pushing the levels too high, like in love or addiction, can cause an unhealthy emotional dependence. So when we break up, our brains lose this regular supply of these neurotransmitters, and we go into neurological withdrawal. Dopamine withdrawal, or if you have an imbalance with too much oxytocin, can cause jealousy, erratic behavior, irrationality. Now, the deficit in these chemicals can make us feel anxious, depressed, isolated, and this is how broken hearts break brains. Now, did you know that a broken heart can actually kill someone? It can happen with a condition known as Takotsubo or stress cardiomyopathy. In popular culture, it's often called a broken heart syndrome. But it doesn't only happen with a broken heart. It actually happens with any stressful period. So it could happen in times of, if someone has had a horrific injury and they're trying to recover from it, causes stress to their bodies. Or someone is grieving as well. So it's not just a broken heart. Now, before the pandemic, the incidence of this was about 1.5% to 1.8%, but during the pandemic, it increased to 7.8%. Now, the cause of this is unclear, though it's thought to be related to stress hormones. So people with this condition can have a sudden bout of chest pain. And as usual, when people have chest pain, they think they have had a heart attack. But fret not. The condition usually reverses itself in a few days or weeks. So for all of these stresses, we really want to manage our stress well. Stress is one of those things that we really do have to fix ourselves. It's got a huge impact on our life, on the quality of our life, the happiness of our days, and our health. But when it really comes down to it, there is nothing that doctors can give you that will take your stress away. There's nothing that modern medicine can do. There's nothing other people can do to take your stress away. A lot of it is on the individual to manage your own stress. You really do have to learn all of these healthy coping mechanisms to manage stress ourselves. But there is a lot of things that we can do. First and foremost, or most important, is to have a healthy diet to nourish your immune system. When it comes to the immune system, there is nothing doctors can do. No medicine that doctors can give that will make the immune system more robust or healthier. The best thing we can do for our immune system is to eat healthy. When we nourish ourselves, we are also nourishing our immune cells. Attempting to use medicine or, anything to boost the cells of our immune system is especially complicated because there's so many different types of cells in the immune system that will respond to so many different microbes in so many different ways. So because of this, our immune system will send a different number of cells depending on what the foreign invader is. So how do you know which cells should you boost, which number, how many, what combination? So far, scientists don't know the answer. So since no one knows how many cells, which ones you need, what's the best mix of cells to operate at the optimum level, how can you pick and choose which ones to nourish and which ones are the best? You can't, so you should just support them all. Now there's a lot of evidence sort of linking all of this together. As we age, our immune response capability becomes reduced, which in turn contributes to more infections and more cancer. As the life expectancy in developed countries has increased, so too has the incidence of age-related conditions. So while some people age healthily, the conclusion of a lot of studies is that compared with younger people, the elderly are more likely to contract infectious diseases and, even more importantly, more likely to die from them. Now, a lot of people just assume that this was something to do with age, that it is something that happens with age. But then if you look at the elderly population, there is also a wide variation between people there. Some people tend to get sick super easily. Other people, they manage perfectly fine. So although age does play a very large role in this, age is not everything. There appears to be a connection between nutrition and immunity in the elderly. So older people, as you get older, you tend to get more set in your ways. You have a routine. You tend to eat less as well, and you also tend to have a less variety in their diets. So the diets of the elderly, the diets they ate as they grew old over the years, also has an impact on their immune system. So it wasn't 100% just due to their age. So like any fighting force, the immune system army marches on its stomach. The healthy immune system warriors need good, regular nourishment. Scientists have long recognized that people who live in poverty or are malnourished are more vulnerable to infectious diseases because they don't have this adequate nutrition. Now, nutrition can also affect your gut microbiome, your gut barrier, the inflammatory processes, your white blood cell function. All of this will impact how well your immune system is working. So all of these dietary patterns and individual foods, it's got an association with increased disease risk, or even a greater risk of allergy or an impaired or inappropriate immune response. Now, just the types of diets matter as well. For example, the Western type diet tends to contain high levels of saturated fats. You've got all of these foods, like a lot of these overall unhealthy foods, and overall you have a high number of calories. Now, this diet is often low in foods associated with better health, like vegetables, fruits, and it's got a strong link to increased risk of chronic diseases. Now, research suggests that this sort of Western type diet induces inflammation and can alter your immune system function, promoting disease development. In contrast, diets rich in whole foods like vegetables, fruits, all of these things, it can actually reduce disease risk and promotes a healthy immune function. All right, so it's a lot of things in your diet can help nourish your immune system, and there's a lot of factors that we have to consider. But when it comes to the diet, it's also one of those things that is entirely within your control. So all of these factors is within your control to change. Another way that people can counter the stress response is by using a combination of approaches that will promote relaxation, like deep breathing, yoga, meditation. Now, people, they sort of brush this off. They sort of go like, oh, it doesn't really work though, or is it just something that people do? All right, researchers have actually studied this, and they found that these does actually do work. For example, researchers have conducted a trial of over 100 patients with hypertension or high blood pressure. Now, half of these patients were assigned these relaxation techniques like deep breathing, meditation, etc. And the other half were just, they just received information about blood pressure control. So about after 8 weeks, the half that actually underwent these relaxation techniques, they had a significantly lower blood pressure, and of that group, a significant number actually went on to reduce or even cut out at least one of their blood pressure medications. So it does have an effect, and there is really no harm in trying. The next part is sleep. Yes, a lack of sleep can affect your immune system. Studies have shown that people who don't get quality sleep or enough sleep are more likely to get sick after being exposed to a virus like the common cold. The lack of sleep can also affect how fast you recover if you do get sleep. Now, during your sleep, your immune system isn't resting. It's actually doing its own thing. It goes into a different phase. So while you sleep, your immune system is releasing proteins called cytokines. Certain cytokines need to increase when you have an infection or inflammation or when you're under stress. Now, cytokines is just a broad group of proteins. Sleep deprivation may decrease the production of certain protective cytokines. And in addition, infection-fighting antibodies and cells are reduced during periods when you don't get enough sleep. So just like sleep can help your brain consolidate learning and memory, research suggests that sleep will strengthen immune memory as well. So this nighttime activity of the immune system also helps you strengthen adaptive immunity, which is the type of immunity that you acquire over time, the specific sort of immunity, the type of immunity you get from vaccines. So this interaction of your immune system during sleep reinforces your immune system's ability to remember how to recognize and to defeat these dangerous foreign invaders. So your body, it really does need sleep to have a strong immune system. But if you're having trouble sleeping, another thing that you can do is just exercise more. If you have a lot of exercise, you tire out your body, so of course you're going to sleep better. Now, people can use exercise as well to stifle the buildup of stress in several ways and to help improve their immune system in several ways as well. Exercise has been proven to help with symptoms of depressive disorders. So for example, people who have depression after exercise, they often experience an improvement in their depressive symptoms. So it can help with that as well. But exercise will also help enhance lymph circulation, which in turn helps filter out toxins. Your immune cells are constantly roaming around your body, looking for problems like cops patrolling the streets. Each bout of exercise, particularly ones that get your heart pumping, instantaneously mobilizes literally billions of immune cells. So it helps your immune cells with its patrolling, helps circulate it throughout your body, throughout your blood and tissues, which means it's better at looking for foreign invaders, which makes us more resistant to infection and better equipped to deal with any infections that have gained a foothold. Exercise also releases various proteins that can help you maintain immunity. The next up is smile. Be happy. Our mood, our mental state, it has a strong influence on our health. Being happy can cause the brain to release dopamine, and it can also increase immune defense against viruses. So there's a lot of things that will link together all of this with our mood, with our general well-being, and this is social support and an attitude of gratitude. Now, when it comes to social support, it's well known that people who are more isolated, that people who are more lonely, they have poorer health. So nurturing the strong social support network can actually help you, can help you sustain your good health, can help you get through times of chronic stress and crisis. All right, and when it comes to an attitude of gratitude, there is a difference in the type of happiness. If someone is driven purely by hollow consumption, then all of their happiness depends on their personal circumstances. If they run into adversity, they may become very stressed. But if they care about something bigger than themselves, community, arts, other people, then everyday stresses will perhaps be of less concern. So look around you. Be more aware of not just what's right in front of you, but by other things, the small things that can bring joy. So, happiness is often conceived in two ways: eudaimonic happiness and hedonic happiness, or pleasure or enjoyment. So eudaimonia, in other words, can help buffer our sense of security, potentially improving our health. So it's fine to invest in yourself as long as you're also investing in lots of other things. Just flourishing and living well is only a part. Now, when it comes to hedonic happiness, the other type of happiness, this is the sort of happiness you get when you see a good movie, or you eat something yummy like ice cream, or you buy yourself a new gadget. This is the happiness that most people are familiar with. Eudaimonic happiness, on the other hand, is something else. It's that sense of deep contentment you get from meaning and purpose. Now, both types of happiness are important. People need both. But hedonic happiness, it tends to be fleeting. It improves the mood for a little bit, but then it goes away. But it's easy. It's an easy source of happiness, which is why it's still important, because sometimes we don't have it in us for anything more than that, and that's okay. Eudaimonic happiness requires effort. It requires time to build. This type of happiness is about being kind to others. It's about opening the door for someone with their hands full, giving a sincere compliment. It's about expressing gratitude, smiling if you feel like it, listening to others, telling others how much you appreciate them. It's about acts of altruism. It's about having a mission bigger than yourself. And what's a good mission, might I suggest? Teaching nutritional immunology. I know that is my eudaimonic source of happiness, because I truly believe that spreading knowledge, helping educate people, helping people prevent diseases in the first place, I can help improve the health and the life of others by giving them the tools and the power and the knowledge that they need to help themselves.
Now we will be answering some questions from the audience. If you have any questions related to health that you would like to ask Dr. Ee, please leave your comment in the live chat section. Dr. Ee, can you share with us more information about the Merck COVID-19 antiviral pill? What is the effectiveness and when should I use it? Can you share with us how this pill works? Is it suitable for all variants of the COVID virus? Is it suitable for prevention of COVID? And is this pill really effective? Is this pill considered a cure?
So Merck's announcement that they have a new sort of antiviral pill has caused a lot of interest in this sort of pill. Now, so the antiviral that they have is something called molnupiravir, and it works by incorporating itself into the genetic material of the virus and then causing a huge number of mutations as the virus replicates, which will effectively kill it. Now, if you think about it, cancer in humans arises because of mutations. So mutations in general is something that is very not good for things that want to replicate and to keep going on. So it kills these viruses by a mechanism known as lethal mutagenesis. So in these sort of really simple terms, it causes the machinery that reproduces the virus's genetic material to make mistakes, to break down, and therefore it renders any copies of the virus defective and it doesn't work anymore. So theoretically, it should work for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, because what happens then is that is targeting this part of the virus that is in control of reading its RNA sequence and replicating it. And since that is something that most viruses of this class have, theoretically, it should work for a lot of variants. Now, what we're concerned about these variants is that, people, the worry people have with that is that when we design our vaccines, the vaccine is looking at a certain part of the virus, is looking at a certain protein of the virus, right? So it's a bit like, if you're showing a picture to someone and you go, we're out to target this person. All right, so vaccines will target this person. But if the person, they get a haircut or they, change a jacket or something, you still should be able to recognize them, right? So, but if it changes too radically, like if they get plastic surgery to, change their face entirely, then, you start to have difficulty recognizing this thing. And that's why, a lot of these varieties are getting better and better and better at escaping the vaccine. But when it comes to this one works in a slightly different way. Now, when you're looking at these sort of medications, it induces RNA mutagenesis. So it is targeting a part of the virus that is not a protein on the outside of the virus, if I can say that. It's not targeting that sort of protein, but it's targeting something called the viral RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. So this is a sort of essential protein that is encoded in the genomes of all RNA-containing viruses. So, and since the COVID-19 virus is an RNA virus, it has this polymerase, this DNA-dependent RNA polymerase. It's got a long name. It's also called RNA replicase. So it's all of these viruses will have this enzyme because this enzyme is needed to replicate DNA from DNA. All right, so theoretically, not only could this sort of medication be used for COVID-19 viruses, but it could theoretically be used for a whole host of different types of viruses as well. But we still need, a lot more research going into that. So this class of drug it targets how a virus replicates. It's not inducing the immune system to recognize it. There's no recognizing that it needs to, there's no recognition that needs to happen going on. All that matters is that is this RNA replicate, is this RNA dependent RNase polymerase present or not? If it's not present, the drug won't have an effect. If it is present, then the drug is meant to target this and to interfere with its function. And by interfering with this function, then the virus won't be able to remain functional, is the goal here. So far, the studies and the trials they've done have shown a reduction in the hospitalization rates. It's showing that it nearly halved hospitalizations in a huge number of high-risk COVID-19 patients. So now this is super promising, because so far, the medications that we do have are things like monoclonal antibodies. And these monoclonal antibodies are administered by things like, IV infusion. So this is usually has to be done in a hospital or a clinic where infected people can risk transmitting the viruses to medical staff or to other people. And plus, it's more invasive. No one wants to get needles stabbed into the arm and they just have to sit there for a few hours while the medicine drips its way through, right? So, and on the other hand, these monoclonal antibody treatments is also really expensive. Another advantage of this new COVID medication is that it can be taken as a pill. So that's why people call it a COVID pill, enabling patients to potentially be treated at home so they don't have to go into hospitals. They don't have to travel more and risk spreading the virus more. And so far, it's projected that the cost of this medication will be much cheaper than the monoclonal antibody treatment that is currently available to treat, COVID-19 patients. So, because so far the clinical studies have shown that it's to be relatively safe, it's been well tolerated, it's more affordable than the other options, and it's much easier to administer, it is super promising. But so far, it's still in its very early stages. We haven't exactly pinned down, who should be taking it, who should not be taking it. They haven't even pinned down if it would be offered only by doctors by prescription, or if they can sell it over the counter to anyone at all. All of this is we still have to see what the future brings to us, but it is something that is pretty promising. So it is something to keep an eye on.
Dr. Yi, does a good immune system prevent long COVID? And
sorry, go on.
A COVID patient with category 4 or 5, which triggers a cytokine storm, how should one deal with this?
Okay, so when you have a good immune system is something that is always, always more promising for any disease. A good immune system is, of course, good for any illness, including long COVID. But when it comes to preventing long COVID, the best way to prevent it is to stop yourself from catching COVID-19 to begin with. And the way you do that is through safe distancing measures, good hand hygiene, and of course, getting vaccinated if you can. But if you already have COVID-19 and you're suffering from COVID-19, then what some patients have, especially the ones with severe cases, is something called a cytokine storm. So what a cytokine storm is that it is when your body goes into a state of hyperinflation. Now, cytokines are usually released by your immune system in responses to infections or, in response to any sort of danger or foreign invader. But what happens in a cytokine storm is that your body releases too many cytokines. It releases these cytokines in an inappropriate response. So your body goes into the state of way too much inflammation. It is a symptom. A lot of people think that it's because your immune system is too strong, but that's not the case. It is an inappropriate response by your immune system. So rather than your immune system being too strong, it's more like your immune system has malfunction. Your immune system is not reacting in a way that it should be reacting in. All right, and so far people still don't really know why does a cytokine storm happen in some people and why does it not happen in other people. It's happened in people who are elderly with a lot of health conditions, but it's also happened in really young patients as well, supposedly young, perfectly healthy patients as well, and they get this cytokine storm going on. Now, the dangers of a cytokine storm is that these, raging levels of cytokines, it can affect all of the organs in your body, not only your lungs, but other organs as well, because there's a level of damage there that is triggered by this inappropriate response. So far, there is not a lot of things that we can do to treat cytokine storms specifically. Cytokine storms are also not something that is unique to COVID-19. It is something that can happen, although rarely in other infections as well. We're just hearing about it a lot in conjunction with COVID-19 because there have been so many cases of it. We're sitting in a pandemic, it's always on our minds, so anything COVID-19 related tends to make the news. But these cytokine storms, it's not something special to COVID-19. It can happen with all sorts of infections out there. But so far, modern medicine, we still don't have a really good way of treating it. There's a lot of therapies that people are trying at the moment. For example, therapies such as monoclonal antibodies to help, target the infection itself. There's a lot of things with, trying out steroids to reduce the levels of inflammation and so forth. But so far, the main treatment is to just support the patient, support their body's functions as they try to weather the storm, basically.
Dr. EE, I'm on blood thinning medication called warfarin, and my doctor told me not to eat any vegetables with vitamin K. What should I do?
So when it comes to these diseases like warfarin, people who take warfarin are often advised to be careful of vitamin K. They're often advised not to eat things like too many vegetables or too many fruits or anything that contains too much vitamin K. Now, why do they say this? Now, it's because, vitamin K can reverse the effects of warfarin. In a hospital setting, doctors can use about 5 milligrams of vitamin K to reverse warfarin. In some cases, even up to 10 milligrams of vitamin K. Now, we do have this option to reverse warfarin because, in emergency situations, if you have a patient on warfarin and they need to go for something like emergency surgery, you want their blood to clot. Warfarin is a drug that stops their blood from clotting. But if you need emergency surgery, if you need a surgeon to cut you open, not clotting means bleeding to death. So you really do want a way to reverse the warfarin in emergency situations. And the sort of treatment for that is vitamin K. So this is why doctors will warn patients on warfarin not to eat things like fruits and vegetables that contain vitamin K. However, for your food to have a significant effect, you would need to eat a huge amount of vitamin K. Now, this is really difficult to do with a normal diet. For example, if you have just like 1 cup of spinach, it's got like 150 micrograms of vitamin K. It's not a lot, remember you need about 5 milligrams, not micrograms of vitamin K. So you need to eat a ridiculous amount of spinach to consume 5 milligrams of vitamin K. But as with anything, medicines react weirdly in different people. That's why, warfarin is one of those drugs that require constant monitoring because there is no one dose that works for everyone. All right, so when you first get put on warfarin, what happens is then that you should be getting your blood levels, your blood clotting levels checked. And your warfarin dose should be adjusted so that your blood clotting is within an expected range. And the dosage of warfarin, or even the timing of the warfarin, kind of vary from person to person. So warfarin is one of those medications that is very individualized. And since they're going to be stabbing you with needles and taking all your blood to go for tests anyway, I feel like instead of doctors telling patients that you should stop eating vegetables, you gotta stop eating spinach, stop eating these leafy green vegetables because it's got vitamin K, what doctors should be doing instead is encouraging their patients to have a healthy diet, encouraging their patients to eat these leafy green vegetables because they're good for you, they're really good for you. And since you're going to be monitoring the clotting levels anyway, since you're going to be stabbing them with needles anyway, don't let it go to waste. All right, adjust the medicine to the patient. Do not adjust the patient to the medication. All right, that is what I believe. So if your doctor says this, what you should be saying is that you should be super set in your resolution to have a healthy diet. Okay, so if your doctor tells you that, what you should be saying is telling them, I'm going to be eating a healthy diet. I will continue to eat green leafy vegetables, and you can adjust my warfarin dose to me. All right, that is what you should be doing, because doctors shouldn't be discouraging their patients from eating healthy. All right, why? All right, so, but the important thing is that you do want to be somewhat consistent with your diet. All right, that's the one caveat I have. You don't want to have a regular dosage of warfarin that you've been on for a while and then like drastically change your diet. That's not good. All right, that might have an effect on your medication because warfarin is one of those super finicky medications. All right, so you want to have a regular diet of leafy green vegetables. Okay, that's okay. You just want to be consistent about that, and your doctor should adjust your warfarin to match you. Okay, so on the other hand, you can also, if you don't want to go through this finicky process of adjusting warfarin to suit you, there are other medications out there. There are these medications called the new oral anticoagulants, most of which don't require the same extensive monitoring that warfarin requires. They don't have the same dietary restrictions, and they should anticoagulate at a level that is just as good as warfarin. So depending on your health conditions, if you really don't want to take warfarin, you can consult your doctor and see if there are other medications that are suitable for you to use. So, there's always options out there.
Dr. Yi, some countries are offering booster shots for certain age groups after completing the first 2 shots of the COVID-19 vaccine. Is it necessary to get the booster shot, and what sort of people need it the most? Also, after 10 days of quarantine for a confirmed COVID-19 person, is this length of quarantine enough? Will the person still be able to spread COVID to others after 10 days? Also, Dr. Yi, currently many who have gotten the 2 doses of the vaccine can be infected with COVID, and especially some elderly who have lost their lives. Please give us some advice on prevention, and is the 3rd dose helpful in that regard?
All right, so when it comes to these booster shots of the COVID-19 vaccine, why are they looking at these booster shots? Now, when you're looking at these booster shots of the COVID-19 vaccine, the main issue there is to try to boost the levels of immunity for the at-risk population. Now, the at-risk population tends to be the elderly or the immunocompromised. All right, so for people who are younger and who are healthier, so far, we still don't need the booster vaccines yet, but because the elderly, the immunocompromised, they're at risk of the more severe consequences of COVID-19 to begin with. They're more likely to become hospitalized, they're more likely to be severely ill. So when it comes to these things, what happens is that we want to protect this at-risk population. All right, so when it comes to this booster shots. It's not like another vaccination. A lot of people believe it's like getting a third vaccination, but it's not really. It's more of reminding your immune system on how to respond to this foreign invader. So for most people, these 2 shots are enough to give them immunity. It's enough to give them immunity, and it's enough for that immunity to last for a while over time. But for people who are elderly, for people who are immunocompromised, their immune system is not in tip-top shape to begin with. Unfortunately, that's just one of the facts of life. So for these at-risk populations, because they're also at risk of the severe consequences of COVID-19, we want to help protect them further. So we want to give them these booster vaccinations because, well, as the name suggests, it is supposedly to boost their response against COVID-19, to help them prevent hospitalization, to help them prevent falling severely ill from these diseases. So for people who are elderly and who are eligible for the booster vaccines, I would recommend that they do go get it because it's safer for them to get the vaccine than to not be fully protected and to fall prey to COVID-19 and just roll the dice there. Am I going to get hospitalized? Am I going to have these severe consequences, etc.? All right, so for anyone who is eligible for a booster vaccine, I would recommend that they would go and get one if you can. But for younger people who are not eligible for a booster vaccine yet, now you might say, okay, what can I do to protect myself in the meantime? For younger people, even though there are some people who get the COVID-19 even after being vaccinated, what the vaccination will do is that it helps prevent against severe disease. That is another really important benefit of the vaccination. Because, no vaccine is 100% effective. That goes without saying. That goes without saying the COVID-19 vaccine is the case as well. Now, again, it's always anything COVID-19 related always makes the news. All right, so people, they hear about people who get vaccinated and they still get COVID and they feel like, oh, does this mean the vaccine doesn't work? Or does this mean that I got the vaccine in vain? Does this mean that I don't need to get the vaccine? No, you should still get the vaccine. No vaccine is 100% effective. And because so many people are getting COVID-19 and because we're tracking all of these cases so carefully, of course, we're going to find the people who become infected and are vaccinated. We're going to find them, and then we're going to throw them into the spotlight for everyone else to see. But vaccination is still really important, okay? Vaccination is effective in preventing infection for a lot of people. All right, and the second really important part of vaccination is that even if you do get infected with COVID-19, the chances of you dying, of becoming hospitalized because of COVID-19, if you have a vaccine, is much, much lower. All right, and third, another thing the vaccine does is that because it's trained your immune system to recognize the virus, to attack it, to destroy it. What happens is that people who are vaccinated may be less likely to spread COVID-19 if they have it because they have a lower viral load, which means a lower number of viruses in them. If you have a really high number of viruses in you, then you're shedding virus everywhere, right? It's like throwing confetti. You got virus shedding everywhere. But if you don't have very much virus to shed to begin with, then the chances of you spreading it around is a lot smaller too. So there's so many benefits to getting vaccinated. So other than getting vaccinated, the next thing that you want to be doing is you want to be practicing your usual protective measures, social distancing, washing hands, etc. Now, when it comes to this, 10-day quarantine after COVID-19, so far what we're aiming for is a good balance between, the length of time we want to force people to quarantine and, how much we want to protect everyone else as well. And so far, 10 to 14 days seems to be a good length of time. It's a good length of time for most people to get over COVID, to, not be at risk of spreading virus everywhere. That's what we want to prevent. Spread virus we don't want that. So what it shows now is that this is a good period. It's a good balance between trying to prevent that and also not locking people up forever. Because a lot of it, we are reaching a time of COVID fatigue. People have gotten less careful about all of these distancing measures. They're getting less careful about all of these measures to prevent getting infected. And if you keep forcing these sort of things on people, this level of unhappiness will rise. People are not going to be compliant. It will have a negative effect on your mental health as well. So there's a balance between how long do we want to force people into quarantine versus, the protective mechanisms we want on everyone else. And so far, that seems to be a good balance. But for anyone, even if you're still getting out of quarantine, if you've never been in quarantine, if you're not vaccinated, if you are vaccinated, everyone should still be practicing these measures like safe distancing, hand washing, wearing a mask. All of these 3 measures have been proven to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. All right. And it's not only preventing, yourself from getting sick, you want to protect other people as well. All right. So you want to stop yourself from spreading the vaccine, even if you don't have it. You might be asymptomatic and not know you have it and be spreading it anyway. So really, all of these measures are to help protect not only you, but everyone around you as well. The next thing that has been, that I also want to address is that all of these measures to stop the spread of the virus could also help stop the emergence of these vaccine variants. Now, how are vaccine variants happening? It's because every time a vaccine replicates, it mutates a little bit. All right, that's just what viruses do. They mutate. So the more people a virus is allowed to infect, the more a virus is allowed to replicate, the more likely we're going to come up with a variant that has the potential to cause us issues. All right, so there's going to be a lot of variants of viruses out there because viruses mutate. It's just what they do. But we do want to, stop the spread, try to limit this mutation, limit this replication, because the more it's allowed to mutate and replicate, the more that we might run into a variant that will cause us issues. So we've got the Delta variant, we've got the Mu variant. If we keep allowing it to spread, we might come up with even more variants in the future. So it is a lot of things working together. And it is one of those situations where I know everyone is really sick and tired of it, but we still do need to persist. We do need to, keep trying to work our way through it and help protect a lot of people out there. Because there's a lot of people out there who will have effects from COVID-19. Like I was going over in the PPT just now, it's not just initial infection we want to be worried about, it's also the sequelae of long COVID. Because COVID is one of those diseases that looks like it's not just a one and done. It's a one and then it just drags on. So all of that as well we want to avoid. We want to protect the people who are vulnerable, the elderly, and even the children who can't get vaccinated yet. They're at risk as well. It's not just because they're children means that they're suddenly immune to COVID, that they won't get sick, that they won't get long COVID. There's still a chance that they could get sick, that they could get long COVID. So for all of us, all of these measures, it's all right, just keep a little distance from people, wear your mask, practice good hand hygiene, and if you are eligible for the vaccine or booster shot, please go and get it.
Dr. Yi, How can patients with thyroid disease and diabetes improve their health through diet and lifestyle?
So people with thyroid disease. Now, for people with thyroid disease, whether it be hyperthyroidism, where they produce too much of a thyroid hormone, or hypothyroidism, where they produce too little of a thyroid hormone, unfortunately, there is no diet that will magically make your thyroid create more or less of the thyroid hormones. All right, so if you have thyroid disease, what you really want to focus on is more of the potential complications or the potential risks you might get from the thyroid diseases. Now, first and foremost, if you have a thyroid disease, please do not rely on your diet to control your thyroid hormones. What you really need to do if you have a thyroid disease is to please listen to your doctor and take the thyroid medications that are prescribed to you. All right. Thyroid disease is one of those things in which you really should not be skipping out on the medication. The medication that doctors give you is to control the levels of your thyroid hormones so that they do not go into dangerous levels, so that they do not go super high and they don't go super low, because both of those extremes are really quite bad for you. And if you go into the super extremes, it's going to have a threat on your life. All right. And also, an imbalance of these thyroid hormones will cause a lot of chronic conditions later on in life. So it's very important for you to do not rely on food to control your thyroid hormones, because that's not going to happen. Okay, you have to take your medications. Be really good at taking your medications, because these medications are there to help control your thyroid hormones. Okay, if you have hypothyroidism, it is to replace your thyroid hormones so that you have enough thyroid hormones to live a healthy life. If you have hyperthyroidism, it is to prevent your thyroid hormones from going too high, so you stay in that normal range. However, diet is still important for reducing your risk of other diseases. For example, people with thyroid issues, or people with diabetes as well, you're more at risk of certain chronic conditions. For example, if you have thyroid diseases, if you have hypothyroidism, you might have issues with gaining weight. Might have issues with constipation. Now, all of these things are things that you can help deal with by adjusting your diet. So your diet does play a really important role, but not for treating the thyroid disease. It's for controlling risk factors for other diseases like heart diseases or anything else that might come with a thyroid disease. When it comes to diabetes and the diet, though, now the link between diabetes and diet is a lot more robust. Diabetes is one of those diseases in which you have, you got a lot of different type of diabetes. You got type 1 diabetes, which is the diabetes that you are born with. All right, now for that type of diabetes, diet is still important, okay? Because again, although you can't help it that you were born with type 1 diabetes, you can adjust your diet and help prevent yourself from getting the further complications of diabetes. For example, you can help reduce the risk of heart disease. You can help reduce the risk of stroke. You can help reduce the risk of other inflammatory conditions. All right, for type 2 diabetes, type 2 diabetes is the sort of diabetes that you can sort of give yourself. If I have to put it in a really direct way, you can sort of give it to yourself by not having a good diet. So if you have a really bad diet, if you're always eating fried chicken all the time, you allow yourself to gain a lot of weight, you eat a lot of, highly processed food like Spam or luncheon meat, or even foods like sausages or bacon, all of these unhealthy foods, you allow yourself to gain a lot of weight. What you're doing is that you are putting a lot of pressure on your pancreatic cells to pump out that insulin. Right? And the more pressure you does, it's a graph that goes on. Your cells will pump out more and more and more and more and more insulin to help deal with your increased body mass until they finally fail. All right, at that point when they fail, that's when you get type 2 diabetes. All right, so it's one of those things in which your diet really does have a key role. Okay, for type 2 diabetes, if you catch it in the super early stages of the disease, you can actually prevent yourself from getting full-blown diabetes through changing your diet and your lifestyle. All right, so if you go to the doctor and they tell you, oh, I'm seeing signs of insulin resistance, or you're pre-diabetic, it means that if you change your diet, if you start eating healthy, if you start exercising more, if you lose weight, there is a really, really good chance that you could stop the diabetes from happening to begin with, to just reverse back and get to that point where you weren't pre-diabetic, you were just you and not diabetic at all. There is a chance there. The difficulty, though, is diagnosing people in that early stages and for people to actually put in the effort. That's the difficult part. But if you already do have type 2 diabetes, then diet is still important. Because for people with diabetes, what happens then is that their body's metabolism is affected. They will metabolize foods in different ways. All right, so it is super important, even more important for them to have a healthy diet than someone without diabetes, because an unhealthy diet will hit them that much harder. All right, so if you have a healthy diet, what you're doing then is that you're eating a lot of vegetables, you're eating a lot of plant foods. And a lot of these plant foods, they will have an effect on helping you control your blood sugar levels to begin with. All right, that's what plant foods do. Plant foods, they contain a lot of fiber. They tend to have a low glycemic index, which means that your blood sugar isn't going to spike up. It's not going to have those wide fluctuations. You're not going to have those spikes in blood sugar, which is what is causing all of the problems that you get with diabetes. So if you have a healthy diet with diabetes, you can prevent the problems that come with diabetes. You can prevent the nerve damage. You can prevent the slow wound healing. You can prevent that risk you have for infections. You can prevent heart disease. You can prevent stroke. You can prevent your eyesight going bad. If you have a healthy diet and you control your blood sugars, you can prevent all of the complications that come with diabetes. All right, so for diabetes, it is super important that you eat healthy. And when it comes to eating healthy, what I mean is you got to eat a lot of plant foods. You want to eat the foods that have a lot of fiber in it, that have a lot of different phytonutrients in it, because it helps your health in so many ways, and not only helping you control your blood sugar levels.
Due to time constraints, the next question will be our last question. Dr. Ii, can you tell us a bit more about perfluorocarbons used in cosmetics? How safe are they?
All right, so when you have perfluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons are something that is like something out of a sci-fi movie. Okay. There are compounds that is really, really, really good at attracting oxygen, at sort of, becoming oxygen. So they're really good at holding on to oxygen. Now, in the past, perfluorocarbons were looked at as an alternate way of, oxygenating someone. Now, if you ever see, sci-fi movies, you always see movies where people will, go into space, or they are frozen in a liquid, or like Star Trek, like sort of healthcare, you of something, and they manage to get their nutrients and their oxygen through this liquid. Right now, it's not exactly entirely out of the realm of possibility. Now, perfluorocarbons have been used as a potential for liquid ventilation, which means that instead of ventilating someone with oxygen, they would ventilate them with a liquid, and not water, but a liquid of perfluorocarbons, because it's just so good at holding on to oxygen and giving off that oxygen to the body. So a lot of research has been done with this. And if you're looking at this, they've done research in neonates who were born too early, and they had lung issues because their lungs weren't fully formed. They would try out this liquid ventilation, and it could possibly help them. It could also possibly help adults as well, especially adults who went through traumatic injuries, who went through burns and whatnot. They could also help them with liquid ventilation and help them oxygenate their body even better. So yes, there's a lot of uses for perfluorocarbons in the medical field, but a lot of it is still still more cutting edge, and it's very much in the realm of sci-fi, but I sort of like it about that. I sort of like the idea of being able to ventilate people with a liquid like perfluorocarbons. But when it comes to the safety of perfluorocarbons are super stable compounds. And because they're super stable compounds, this means that they're not likely to react with other chemicals out there, which means that they're likely to just stay in its own lane. It's going to do its job, and it's just going to ignore the other distractions around it, which is basically what it means when I say it's super stable. So you can throw a lot of things at that, and it's just going to, it's just going to do its thing. It's going to, do its thing with oxygen, attract the oxygen, become super oxygenated, do its own thing, and it's not likely to deviate from this. All right, so being super stable means is that it's got a very reliable effect. And if you look at the perfluorocarbons, there's a lot of them out there, but there are a lot of types of perfluorocarbons that we look at for medical research. And for the ones that they use in medical research, for the ones that they could use for, in the clinical setting, just think about it. They pump it into someone's lungs. Do that. It's safe to put on your skin. So perfluorocarbons are one of those things that is super interesting out there. And you don't have to worry about it having danger to your skin.
Thank you, Dr. Yi, for taking your time to educate us regarding health today.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all about health and for listening to my talk. I hope you found it both informative and interesting.